A police dog was shot by a criminal, but what happened next proved he was a true hero. The sun was just beginning to set, casting a golden glow over the quiet city streets. Officer Thomas patted the head of his loyal partner, Rex, a Belgian Malinois with sharp eyes and an unwavering spirit. The two had been inseparable for years, working side by side through countless missions. Today had been calm, almost too calm. Part of Thomas knew it wouldn't last. "You ready, buddy?" he asked softly, giving Rex a reassuring scratch behind the ears. The dog looked up, tail wagging slightly, his body tense with anticipation. There was always a quiet understanding between them. Rex was more than just a dog. He was a partner, a protector, and most importantly, a friend. The radio crackled to life, cutting through the peaceful moment. "All units, we have a reported armed robbery in progress at 8th and Main. Suspect is considered armed and dangerous. Proceed with caution." Thomas's grip tightened on the steering wheel as adrenaline surged through his veins. His eyes flicked to Rex, who was already alert. His ears perked up and ready for action. "Looks like we're up," Thomas said, his voice steady despite the tension rising in his chest. He could always count on Rex when things got tough. As the squad car sped toward the scene, the streets blurred by in a rush of lights and shadows. The hum of the sirens filled the air, blending with the beat of Thomas's heart. His mind raced, running through possible scenarios. He had seen enough dangerous situations to know how quickly things could go wrong. They arrived at the scene in minutes. The storefront of a small convenience store was dark, its glass door shattered into jagged pieces. The chaos inside was evident. Shelves overturned, merchandise scattered across the floor. A few frightened bystanders stood nearby, whispering nervously among themselves. Thomas exited the vehicle, Rex by his side, his movements deliberate and controlled. He scanned the area, his sharp eyes missing nothing. "Stay close," he whispered to Rex, who responded with a low, affirmative bark. Together, they moved toward the entrance. The air inside the store was thick with tension, the smell of spilled drinks and adrenaline hanging in the air. Thomas raised his weapon, his steps cautious. He could hear movement toward the back, a shuffle of feet, the sound of a glass bottle tipping over. His pulse quickened. "Police!" Thomas called out, his voice firm but calm. "Show yourself. Come out with your hands up." For a moment there was silence. Then, a shadow darted across the back wall. Thomas tightened his grip on his weapon, his eyes narrowing. He knew this could go south quickly. He glanced at Rex, who was already locked onto the movement, his body coiled like a spring ready to launch. "Rex, track," Thomas commanded, his voice steady. Rex surged forward, his paws silent against the tile floor. Thomas followed closely, his eyes trained on the darkened corner of the store. The suspect had nowhere to run, he was boxed in. Thomas could see the panic in the man's eyes, the way his chest rose and fell in rapid, shallow breaths. "Down on the ground," Thomas ordered. "Now!" The man hesitated for a split second too long, his eyes darting around as if searching for an escape. Thomas barely had time to react before the suspect pulled a weapon from his waistband and fired. The sound of the gunshot echoed through the small space like a thunderclap, shattering the tense silence. Time seemed to slow as Thomas watched in horror. Rex let out a sharp yelp and crumpled to the ground. "No!" Thomas's voice cracked, his heart lurching in his chest. He moved without thinking, firing back at the suspect. The man dropped his weapon and fell to the floor, groaning in pain. Thomas barely noticed. His focus was entirely on Rex. He dropped to his knees beside his partner, his hands trembling as he gently touched the dog's side. Blood seeped through Rex's thick fur, staining Thomas's fingers. His pulse thundered in his ears. "Hang on, buddy. Hang on," he whispered, his voice tight with emotion. The next few moments blurred into a chaotic rush. Fellow officers stormed in, securing the suspect and calling for backup. Thomas barely registered their voices. His world had narrowed to the injured dog in front of him. A paramedic knelt beside him, gently checking Rex's wound. "We need to get him to an emergency vet," she said, her voice calm but urgent. There's a chance we can save him, but we have to move fast. Thomas nodded, swallowing the lump rising in his throat. He scooped Rex into his arms, the weight of his partner far heavier than it had ever felt before. "You're going to be okay," he whispered, his voice breaking. "You've always been a fighter." The drive to the emergency vet was a blur of flashing lights and desperate prayers. Thomas's mind raced, memories flashing before him. Every mission, every close call, every quiet moment shared with Rex. The thought of losing him was unbearable. At the clinic, a team of veterinarians sprang into action, whisking Rex away before Thomas could say goodbye. He stood frozen for a moment, his arms empty, his heart feeling the same. The waiting room was eerily quiet except for the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Thomas sank into a chair, his head in his hands. Time seemed to stretch endlessly, each second dragging on with unbearable weight. He couldn't shake the image of Rex lying on the floor, his eyes full of trust and pain. An officer he recognized approached, placing a hand on his shoulder. "He's tough," the officer said softly. "If anyone can pull through this, it's Rex." Thomas nodded, his throat too tight to speak. He clung to that hope with everything he had, refusing to let go. As the minutes ticked by, the doors to the operating room remained closed. Each passing second felt like a lifetime. Thomas replayed every moment in his mind, searching for something he could have done differently, something that might have protected Rex from harm. He knew it was irrational. Rex had done what he was trained to do, just like he always had. Still, the guilt gnawed at him, a relentless ache in his chest. Finally, the doors swung open, and a veterinarian in scrubs stepped into the waiting room. Her expression was serious but not grim. A small spark of hope lit in Thomas's chest. "He's stable," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "The bullet missed any vital organs, but he lost a lot of blood. We've done everything we can for now. The next 24 hours will be critical." Thomas exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, his shoulders sagging with relief. "Can I see him?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. The vet nodded. "He's resting, but you can sit with him." Thomas followed her into the recovery room, his steps slow and deliberate. His heart clenched as he saw Rex lying on a padded mat, and 4 hooked up to his foreleg. His chest rose and fell in shallow but steady breaths. Thomas knelt beside him, his hand gently resting on Rex's head. "Hey, buddy," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You scared the hell out of me. You know that?" Rex's eyes fluttered open, just for a moment. His tail gave a weak thump against the mat. Thomas chuckled softly, wiping a tear from his cheek. "That's my boy." He sat there for hours, refusing to leave Rex's side. The clinic faded around him, the world outside forgotten. All that mattered was the steady rhythm of Rex's breathing and the unbreakable bond between them. This wasn't the end of their story. Not yet. The night stretched on in the dimly lit recovery room. Thomas remained by Rex's side, refusing to let exhaustion drag him away. His eyes felt heavy, and his muscles ached from the tension that hadn't left him since the gunshot. But no amount of fatigue could pull him from this spot. Every shallow breath Rex took was a small victory, and Thomas wasn't about to miss a single one. The soft hum of the machines monitoring Rex's vitals was the only sound in the room. Each beep gave Thomas a strange sense of comfort. It meant Rex was still fighting. The vet had warned him that the next 24 hours would be critical, but in Thomas's heart, there was no room for doubt. Rex had survived worse. He was the toughest dog Thomas had ever known. Memories began to flood back, filling the silence with images of all they had been through together. Thomas remembered their first assignment, a search and rescue operation after a devastating storm. A family had been trapped in the wreckage of their home, and it was Rex who found them. He had crawled through narrow gaps in the debris, barking sharply to alert Thomas when he located the survivors. That day, Rex became a hero in the eyes of the city. To Thomas, he already was. He smiled faintly at the memory, his hand still resting on Rex's head. "You've always been my miracle, buddy," he whispered. "And you're going to get through this, just like you always do." A nurse stepped into the room, checking the floor and jotting down notes on a clipboard. She glanced at Thomas with a warm, reassuring smile. "He's a fighter," she said. "I've seen dogs come back from worse. Just give him time." Thomas nodded, appreciating her kindness. But time was the one thing he hated right now. Every passing second stretched like an eternity, filled with uncertainty and fear. He watched Rex's chest rise and fall, counting each breath, silently willing him to keep going. The hours passed slowly. Outside the clinic, the sky began to lighten as dawn approached. The soft, golden light filtered through the windows, casting a gentle glow over the room. For the first time since the ordeal began, Thomas allowed himself to relax. Just a little. Rex stirred slightly, his ears twitching. His eyes flickered open for a moment longer this time, locking onto Thomas's face. The weak thump of his tail followed, just barely audible against the padded mat. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes. Rex was still in the fight. Thomas felt a wave of relief wash over him. "There you are," he said, his voice breaking into a relieved chuckle. "You're not getting rid of me that easily, you know." Rex's eyes closed again, but Thomas saw the spark of recognition in them. It was enough to keep his hope alive. The clinic doors opened, and another familiar face appeared. Officer Daniels, one of Thomas's closest friends on the force. His eyes darted to Rex before settling on Thomas with a mixture of concern and relief. "I heard what happened," Daniels said, stepping closer. "How's he doing?" "He's stable," Thomas replied, his voice steady but tired. "The vet says it'll be touch and go for the next day or so. But he's hanging on." Daniels crouched beside him, gently patting Rex's back. "He's tough. He's always been tougher than the rest of us combined." He paused, his voice growing softer. "The whole department's rooting for him." Words already spreading about what he did. Thomas nodded, feeling a lump form in his throat. "He saved my life," he said quietly, "like he's done a dozen times before." Daniels stayed for a while, keeping Thomas company in the silence. They talked in low voices about old cases and shared memories of Rex's many acts of bravery. It was a welcome distraction, but every conversation eventually circled back to the same topic: how strong Rex had always been, and how much the city owed him. After a while, Daniels rose to leave. "You call me if you need anything," he said. "And don't even think about coming back to work until this guy is up and walking around again. We've got things covered." Thomas nodded, offering a faint smile. "Thanks, man. I appreciate it." Daniels gave him a firm pat on the shoulder before stepping out, leaving Thomas alone with Rex once again. The room felt quieter now, but not in a bad way. It was a peaceful sort of quiet, filled with the unspoken understanding between two partners who had been through hell and back together. A few more hours passed, and the vet returned for another checkup. She listened to Rex's heartbeat, gently examining the wound on his side. Her expression softened as she looked at Thomas. "He's doing better than I expected," she said. "His vitals are strong. If he keeps this up, I'm optimistic about his recovery." Thomas felt his chest tighten with a rush of emotion. Relief, gratitude, and a surge of hope he hadn't dared to feel until now. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. The vet nodded. "He's not out of the woods yet, but he's on the right track. Keep talking to him. It helps more than you'd think." Thomas smiled, turning back to Rex. "You hear that? You're on the right track, buddy. Just keep fighting." The day wore on, and slowly but surely, Rex's condition continued to improve. The weak tail thumps became more frequent. His eyes stayed open longer, following Thomas's every move. He was far from his old self, but the progress was undeniable. News of Rex's bravery spread quickly through the department and the city. Messages of support poured in from fellow officers, friends, and even strangers who had heard the story. A few officers dropped by to check on him, bringing treats and handwritten notes of encouragement. It was clear that Rex was more than just a police dog. He was a symbol of courage and loyalty. Thomas read some of the messages aloud to Rex, his voice filled with pride. "Looks like you've got fans, buddy. People all over the city are pulling for you. Rex gave another soft thump of his tail and Thomas laughed. "You're going to milk this for all it's worth, aren't you?" The connection between them had always been strong, but now it felt unbreakable. Every small victory, every wag of the tail, every slow blink, was a reminder of how far they had come. Rex wasn't just a dog, he was family. Thomas knew that the road ahead would be long. Recovery wouldn't happen overnight. But for the first time since that fateful night, he allowed himself to believe that everything was going to be okay. Days passed in a slow, steady rhythm at the clinic. Rex's condition continued to improve, though every step forward was cautious and measured. Thomas rarely left his side, staying with his partner through every moment of the recovery process. The nurses began to recognize him, bringing him coffee and offering gentle reassurances that Rex was a fighter. The city outside moved on, but Thomas's world remained locked in this room. He didn't mind. Every breath Rex took felt like a small victory. Every little improvement, an extra wag of his tail, a stronger flicker of his eyes, was a reminder that hope wasn't just something distant. It was right there, growing stronger with each passing day. One afternoon, as the sun poured in through the clinic windows, Thomas sat on the floor next to Rex, his back resting against the wall. He held a crumpled photo in his hand, a picture taken 2 years ago, the two of them standing proudly after a successful drug bust. Rex looked younger, full of energy, his tongue hanging out happily. Thomas smiled softly at the memory. "You've always been a show-off, haven't you?" he said, glancing at Rex, stealing the spotlight, taking all the credit. "But you earned it, buddy. You've always been the best." Rex stirred slightly, his eyes opening halfway. His tail gave another weak thump, as if acknowledging the compliment. Thomas chuckled, feeling warmth fill his chest. The door creaked open, and Thomas turned to see a young woman standing there, holding a small envelope. She looked nervous, her eyes darting between him and Rex. "Officer Thomas?" she asked, her voice tentative. Thomas stood, brushing himself off. "Yeah, that's me. Can I help you?" She stepped closer, holding out the envelope. "I heard about what happened. I wanted to drop this off. My son, he loves police dogs. He made this for Rex when he heard the story on the news." Thomas carefully took the envelope, his heart swelling. Inside was a hand-drawn card with a picture of a dog that vaguely resembled Rex, complete with a superhero cape. Beneath it, in wobbly handwriting, were the words, "Get well soon, Rex. You're my hero." He blinked rapidly, swallowing the lump that rose in his throat. "Thank you," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "This means a lot. I'll make sure Rex knows he's got a fan." The woman smiled and gave a small nod before leaving the room. Thomas turned back to Rex, holding up the card. "Look at that. You're famous now. A real superhero." Rex's eyes focused on the card for a moment before his tail thumped again. Stronger this time. "You like that, huh?" Thomas chuckled. "Well, looks like you've got a kid waiting for you to get back on your feet. Can't let him down, can we?" The days continued, each one a little brighter than the last. Rex's strength grew steadily. His once shallow breaths became deeper, more even. The vet allowed him to sit up for short periods, and though he was still weak, the determination in his eyes never wavered. Every time Thomas encouraged him, Rex responded with a spark of life that filled the room with hope. It wasn't long before the clinic staff began whispering about the miracle dog. His recovery seemed almost too good to be true, but Thomas knew better. This wasn't a miracle, it was just Rex being Rex. He had always been a fighter, a survivor. On the 10th day, the vet delivered the news Thomas had been waiting for. "If he keeps improving at this rate, we'll be able to discharge him by the end of the week," she said with a smile. "He'll still need time to recover fully, but you'll be able to take him home." Thomas grinned, relief washing over him like a wave. "Thank you. I don't know how to repay you for everything you've done. Just keep taking care of him," the vet said. "That's all the thanks I need." The next few days were a whirlwind of preparations. Thomas made sure his apartment was ready for Rex's recovery. Soft bedding, plenty of space to rest, and all the toys and treats he could think of. He couldn't wait to bring Rex back home where he belonged. Finally, the day arrived. The clinic was filled with an air of celebration as Thomas walked Rex out the front door. Fellow officers had gathered to see them off, clapping and cheering as the pair stepped into the sunlight. Rex walked slowly, his steps careful but steady. His head was held high, his tail wagging gently. He seemed to know that this was his moment. Officer Daniels stood at the front of the crowd, a broad grin on his face. "Welcome back, hero," he said, giving Rex a gentle pat on the head. "We missed you." The applause grew louder, and Thomas felt his eyes sting with tears he didn't bother to hide. He looked down at Rex, his heart swelling with pride. "You did it, buddy," he whispered. "You made it." Rex barked softly, a sound that seemed to say, "Of course I did." The days that followed were filled with quiet recovery. Thomas made sure Rex had everything he needed, keeping a close eye on his progress. They went for short walks around the block, each one a little longer than the last. Neighbors stopped to greet them, offering words of encouragement and pats for Rex. Though Rex was still regaining his strength, his spirit remained unbreakable. He seemed to enjoy the attention, soaking up every kind word and treat with a wag of his tail. Late one evening, as they sat on the couch together, Thomas looked at Rex with a soft smile. "You know, buddy, I've been thinking about what the vet said. How you're not just a survivor, you're a miracle. And she's right. You've been a miracle from the start." Rex rested his head on Thomas's lap, his eyes closing contentedly. The world outside had grown dark, but the warmth inside was all they needed. For the first time in what felt like forever, everything was calm again. And in that quiet moment, Thomas knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it together, just like they always had. Because Rex wasn't just a hero, he was family. The following weeks were a mixture of triumphs and challenges as Rex continued his recovery. Each day was a little better than the last. The once small steps he took around the block soon turned into longer walks. His strength was returning steadily, though Thomas still kept a close eye on him, careful not to push too hard too soon. Despite his progress, Rex's life was quieter now. No sudden dashes across the field or fast pursuits down alleyways. Thomas wondered how his partner felt about it. This new pace of life, far from the intense work that had once defined them both. One evening, as they sat on the porch, Thomas watched the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink. Rex lay beside him, his head resting on his paws, watching the world with calm, steady eyes. "You miss it, don't you?" Thomas said softly, reaching down to ruffle the fur behind Rex's ears. The action, the thrill, all the excitement. Rex lifted his head slightly, his eyes meeting Thomas's as if to say, "I'm still here and I'm not done yet." Thomas smiled. "Yeah, I know. You've got that fire in you. It's never really gone out, has it?" The next morning, Thomas was greeted with an unexpected knock at the door. Standing outside was Captain Harris, a tall man with a commanding presence and a warm smile. "Thomas," the captain said, extending a hand. "Good to see you. How's Rex?" "He's doing great," Thomas replied, motioning for him to come inside. "Come on in. I'm sure Rex would love to see you." The captain stepped inside, his eyes immediately finding Rex lying comfortably near the couch. "There's the hero himself," he said with a grin, crouching down to give Rex a few affectionate pats. "I've got to say, the whole department's been talking about you. You're a legend, Rex." Rex's tail wagged enthusiastically, a clear sign that he was enjoying the attention. "I actually came by with a proposition," Captain Harris said, turning back to Thomas. "I know Rex is retired from active duty, but we've been considering starting a new program, something less demanding but still incredibly important. We're looking for experienced dogs to help train new recruits. They need guidance from the best. And frankly, there's no one better than Rex." Thomas blinked, surprised. "You want Rex to help train the next generation of K9 units?" "That's right," Harris said. "It wouldn't be anything strenuous. Mostly obedience training and showing the younger dogs how things are done in real situations. His experience could be invaluable." Thomas glanced at Rex, who was now sitting up, his eyes bright and attentive. There was a spark in him, a fire that hadn't dimmed despite everything he'd been through. "What do you think, buddy?" Thomas asked, crouching next to him. "Want to teach the rookies how it's done?" Rex barked softly, his tail wagging furiously. "I'll take that as a yes," Thomas said with a laugh. "Looks like you're not quite ready for full retirement after all." The next week, they found themselves back at the station. The familiar sights and sounds filled Thomas with a strange mix of nostalgia and pride. Rex walked beside him, his head held high, his steps confident. Though his body still bore the scars of his recent ordeal, his spirit was as strong as ever. The new recruits watched with awe as Rex demonstrated basic commands and tactical maneuvers. His movements were precise and calm, each step a testament to the years of training and experience behind him. One of the younger officers approached Thomas, eyes wide. "I've heard the stories, but seeing him in action, it's something else. He's incredible." Thomas nodded, his chest swelling with pride. "Yeah, he's the best partner I've ever had." Rex's influence on the new recruits was almost immediate. The younger dogs began to mirror his behavior, following his lead with growing confidence. It was as though Rex's steady presence gave them the courage they needed to face the challenges ahead. Days turned into weeks, and Rex found a new rhythm. Though the work was different, it was no less fulfilling. He had a purpose again, and it showed in every wag of his tail and every eager bark. Thomas couldn't have been prouder. Watching Rex thrive, even after everything they had endured, was nothing short of miraculous. One day, as they finished a training session, a group of officers gathered around, clapping and cheering. Captain Harris stepped forward, holding a small box in his hands. "Rex," the captain began, his voice steady but warm, "for your years of service, your bravery, and your unwavering dedication, it's our honor to present you with this award." He opened the box, revealing a gleaming medal engraved with Rex's name and the words, "For courage and loyalty beyond measure." The room erupted into applause as Harris placed the medal around Rex's neck. Thomas felt his eyes welling up, his heart swelling with pride and gratitude. "You've earned this, buddy," he said softly, crouching down to embrace his partner. "Every single bit of it." Rex barked happily, his tail thumping against the floor. In that moment, surrounded by friends and colleagues, Thomas knew that this was more than just a new chapter. It was a celebration of everything they had overcome together. The road ahead would still have its challenges, but they would face it the same way they always had, side by side, partners through it all. Because Rex wasn't just a hero to Thomas. He was an inspiration to everyone who had ever met him. And his story was far from over.